Parrot sees a baby approaching a full bathtub while the babysitter is distracted on the phone. What he did saved the baby's life. Please listen until the end to be amazed by this story. Sarah's piercing screech cut through the peaceful afternoon silence of the Richardson household. The African grey parrot, perched in her corner cage, had always been vocal, but this time her cries carried a different weight, an urgency that seemed almost human. "Water, water, danger, danger!" she screeched repeatedly, her wings flapping against the cage bars with unprecedented vigor. Jack Emmett, the newly hired nanny, was in the kitchen, completely absorbed in a heated phone conversation about a personal matter. His voice rose and fell as he paced back and forth, one hand pressing the phone to his ear while the other gestured animatedly in the air. The baby monitor sat silent on the counter beside him, its green light blinking steadily, suggesting all was well with little Diana upstairs. But all was not well. Diana, a curious toddler with an adventurous spirit, had managed to climb out of her playpen while Jack was distracted. Her tiny feet had carried her across the plush carpet and into the master bathroom, where Fiona, her mother, had been running a bath before receiving an urgent call from work that pulled her away. In her rush to handle the crisis at her office, she had forgotten to drain the tub. The bathroom door stood slightly ajar, and Diana, attracted by the shimmer of water and her own reflection, pushed it open wider. The sound of her gleeful babbling was drowned out by Jack's increasingly agitated conversation downstairs. Sarah's cries grew more frantic. The intelligent bird had watched Diana toddle past her cage and up the stairs. Through the open upstairs hallway, she could see the child approaching the bathroom. Sarah had lived with the family long enough to understand that water could be dangerous for the little one. Danger, Diana, water. Sarah's vocabulary, usually limited to simple greetings and mimicked phrases, seemed to expand in this moment of crisis. She rocked her cage violently, causing it to swing on its stand. Downstairs, Jack continued his conversation, oblivious to the drama unfolding above. "No, you don't understand," he argued into the phone. "This isn't something that can wait." Diana reached the bathtub, her small hands gripping the smooth porcelain edge. The water was still warm, creating inviting ripples as she leaned over to touch it. Her reflection smiled back at her, and she giggled, reaching further. Sarah's next screech was so loud and piercing that it finally penetrated Jack's consciousness. He paused mid-sentence, suddenly aware of the bird's unusual behavior. In the months he had worked for the family, he had never heard Sarah make such sounds. "Let me call you back," he said abruptly, ending the call. As he listened more carefully, he could distinguish words among Sarah's cries. The mention of Diana and water sent a chill down his spine. The baby monitor remained silent, but Jack's instincts finally kicked in. He took the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding as Sarah's warnings grew louder with each step. As he reached the top of the stairs, he saw the bathroom door wide open. Diana was leaning precariously over the tub's edge, her balance teetering as she reached for a rubber duck floating just out of reach. Time seemed to slow as Jack crossed the remaining distance in what felt like slow motion. He reached Diana just as she began to slip, his hands grasping her tiny waist and pulling her back from the water's edge. She squealed in surprise as he clutched her to his chest, his heart racing as he realized how close they had come to disaster. Sarah's cries immediately ceased, replaced by a soft, almost relieved-sounding, "Good, good," that echoed through the now quiet house. Jack sat on the bathroom floor, still holding Diana tightly, his professional demeanor cracking as the reality of what could have happened sank in. The little girl, unaware of the danger she had been in, patted his face with her small hands, confused by the tears in his eyes. In her cage downstairs, Sarah preened her feathers calmly, as if nothing unusual had happened. But something extraordinary had occurred. A bird's intelligence and devotion had potentially saved a child's life. When Fiona returned home that evening, she found Jack sitting at the kitchen table, Diana safely playing in her now secured playpen nearby. His usual confident expression was replaced by one of humility and residual fear. Sarah watched from her cage as Jack recounted the afternoon's events, his voice shaking slightly, as he explained how the parrot's warnings had alerted him to the danger. Fiona listened, her face growing pale as she realized how close they had come to tragedy. Her eyes darted between her happily playing daughter, the now drained bathtub visible up the stairs, and Sarah, who sat quietly observing the scene. "I'm so sorry," Jack began, expecting to be fired on the spot. "I should never have been on the phone. I should have been watching her more carefully. I understand if you want me to leave." But Fiona's response surprised him. Instead of anger, her eyes filled with tears of gratitude. She walked over to Sarah's cage and opened the door, something she rarely did in the evening hours. Sarah stepped onto her offered hand, and Fiona brought the bird close to her face. "Thank you," she whispered to Sarah, who gently nudged her cheek with her beak in response. "Thank you for watching over her when we failed to." The incident marked a turning point in the household. Jack, humbled by his mistake and grateful for the second chance, became even more vigilant in his duties. Fiona implemented stricter safety measures throughout the house, ensuring that such a close call could never happen again. And Sarah, she received extra treats and attention, though she showed no sign of understanding the magnitude of what she had done. She simply continued her daily routine of observing, learning, and occasionally intervening in the life of the family she had become an integral part of. But this was just the beginning of Sarah's story, and her role in the household was about to become even more crucial in ways none of them could have anticipated. The incident with Diana changed everything in the Richardson household, but not in the ways anyone might have expected. While Sarah's heroic warning had saved Diana from potential tragedy, it had also opened a door to something deeper, something that had been simmering beneath the surface of their seemingly perfect family life. Fiona began spending more time at home, her close call with tragedy making her reevaluate her priorities. She would often sit in the living room, watching Diana play while Sarah observed from her perch. The parrot had become more than just a pet. She was now an unofficial guardian, her presence both comforting and somehow unsettling. One afternoon, as rain tapped against the windows, Jack noticed something unusual about Sarah's behavior. The bird seemed agitated, moving restlessly in her cage whenever Xavier, Fiona's husband, entered the room. So at first, Jack dismissed it as coincidence, but as the days passed, the pattern became impossible to ignore. Xavier had been away on a business trip during the bathtub incident, and his return brought a subtle tension to the house. He was a successful businessman, always impeccably dressed, with a smile that never quite reached his eyes. While he showered Diana with expensive gifts, there was something mechanical about his affection, as if he was following a script of what a loving father should do. "She's just a bird," Xavier would say dismissively whenever Fiona mentioned Sarah's heroic act. "Birds make noise. It was just coincidence." But his eyes would linger on Sarah's cage, and something in his expression made Jack uncomfortable. One evening, while preparing Diana's dinner, Jack overheard an argument between Fiona and Xavier in their study. Their voices were muffled, but words like insurance and accident drifted through the door. Sarah, who had been quietly playing with her toys, suddenly became very still, her head cocked toward the study. "I just think we need to be more careful." Fiona's voice rose slightly. "After what almost happened—" "Nothing happened," Xavier cut her off. "And nothing will happen. You're being paranoid." Jack tried to focus on mashing Diana's vegetables, but he couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to this conversation than simple parental concern. Sarah's unusual behavior around Xavier, the argument about insurance. It all seemed to point to something, but he couldn't quite piece it together. Later that night, after Diana was tucked safely in bed, Jack was tidying up the kitchen when he heard Sarah making an unfamiliar sound. It wasn't her usual chatter or even the warning screech from the bathtub incident. Instead, she seemed to be mimicking a conversation. The insurance, make it look like... Sarah's voice was different, deeper, an eerily accurate imitation of Xavier. "Accident must be convincing." Jack froze, the dish towel slipping from his hands. Had Sarah just revealed something she'd overheard, something she wasn't supposed to hear? His mind raced with possibilities, each more disturbing than the last. The next day, Jack paid closer attention to Xavier's interactions with Diana. On the surface, everything seemed normal. A father playing with his daughter, helping her with her blocks, pushing her on her little swing in the backyard. But there was something rehearsed about it all, as if Xavier was performing for an invisible audience. Sarah watched too, her bright eyes following Xavier's every move. When he approached Diana's swing, the parrot would ruffle her feathers and make soft warning sounds, not the full-blown alarm from the bathtub incident, but enough to make Jack nervous. Fiona seemed to notice it too. She began spending more time with Diana when Xavier was around, her casual hovering masking a mother's protective instinct. She would catch Jack's eye sometimes, and he could see his own concerns reflected in her gaze. One afternoon, while Diana napped and Fiona was in her home office on a call, Jack was organizing the playroom when he overheard Xavier on his phone in the hallway. The man's voice was low, careful, but some words carried clearly. Yes, everything's in place. No, no one suspects. The bird. Don't worry about the bird. Jack's heart began to race. He looked at Sarah, who sat perfectly still in her cage, her eyes fixed on the hallway where Xavier's voice was coming from. The parrot had been with the family for years, long before Jack's arrival. What else had she heard? What else did she know? That evening, as Jack was preparing to leave for the day, Fiona pulled him aside. Her face was drawn with worry, and she kept glancing over her shoulder as if afraid of being overheard. "Jack, I need to ask you something," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "Have you noticed anything unusual lately? About Xavier, I mean." Before Jack could respond, Sarah's voice rang out from her cage, clear and precise. "Accident must be convincing. Insurance will pay." The color drained from Fiona's face. They both turned to look at Sarah, who met their gaze with an intelligence that seemed almost human. In that moment, Jack realized that the bathtub incident might not have been just a close call. It might have been a warning of something far more sinister. "Those are Xavier's words," Fiona whispered, her hands trembling. "I've heard him on the phone. I thought I was imagining things, but Sarah..." Jack felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. He was more than just a nanny now. He had become entangled in something dark and dangerous. But as he looked at Diana's picture on the wall, her innocent smile beaming down at them, he knew he couldn't simply walk away. Sarah ruffled her feathers and shifted on her perch, her eyes never leaving them. She had already proven once that she would act to protect Diana. Now it seemed she was trying to protect her again, but from a threat far more calculated than a full bathtub. As thunder rumbled in the distance, Jack and Fiona exchanged looks of understanding. They needed to figure out what Xavier was planning, and they needed to do it before it was too late. Sarah had given them a warning, but this time, preventing tragedy would require more than just a timely screech. The question was, how do you prove someone's dangerous intentions when your key witness is a parrot? The following days in the Richardson household were filled with a suffocating tension. Every casual interaction, every seemingly innocent moment, now carried the weight of suspicion. Jack found himself watching Xavier's every move while trying to appear normal, a task that grew increasingly difficult. Fiona had begun documenting everything: Xavier's phone calls, his unexpected absences, the times he spent alone with Diana. She kept a small notebook hidden in her desk drawer, each entry a potential piece of evidence. But evidence of what? They still weren't sure exactly what they were trying to prove. Sarah remained their most reliable witness, though an unconventional one. The parrot continued to repeat fragments of Xavier's conversations, each one more troubling than the last. "Remove the problem. Make it clean, no questions asked." The phrases came at random times, always in Xavier's voice, always when he wasn't around. One morning, while Xavier was supposedly at work, Jack was surprised to find him in his home office, hunched over his computer. The door had been left slightly ajar, and through the gap, Jack could see him scrolling through what appeared to be insurance policies. "Everything all right, sir?" Jack asked, deliberately making his presence known. Xavier, startled, quickly minimizing the window on his screen. Fine," he said, his usual smooth composure slightly ruffled. "Just reviewing some family paperwork. Nothing interesting." But later that day, when Xavier left for a meeting, Jack noticed he'd forgotten to log out of his computer. It was an opportunity they couldn't ignore. Fiona stood watch while Jack quickly documented what was on the screen. multiple browser tabs about accident statistics, life insurance policies, and most disturbing of all, searches about untraceable poisons. "We need to tell someone," Jack whispered to Fiona as they reviewed the evidence. "This is bigger than we thought." But Fiona hesitated. "Who would believe us? Most of this is circumstantial. And how do we explain Sarah's role without sounding crazy?" Their conversation was interrupted by Sarah's sudden agitation. "Diana! Diana!" she called out, her tone urgent but not panicked. They rushed to the playroom, where they found Xavier had returned early and was sitting with Diana, helping her arrange her blocks. "Just building a tower," Xavier said pleasantly. But something about his smile made Jack's skin crawl. On the floor beside them was Diana's sippy cup, filled with what looked like her usual juice. Sarah's calls had drawn Xavier's attention, and he looked at the bird with barely concealed annoyance. "That bird is becoming a nuisance," he said, "always screeching and interrupting. Perhaps it's time we found her a new home." The suggestion hung in the air like a threat. They all knew Sarah was more than just a pet now. She was a witness, a protector, and possibly Diana's best defense against whatever Xavier was planning. That evening, after Xavier left for a business dinner, Fiona made a discovery that chilled them to the bone. Hidden in his office drawer was a small vial of clear liquid, unlabeled and suspicious. Beside it was a printed email discussing insurance policy changes that would take effect soon, with Diana's name prominently featured. "He's going to do something to her," Fiona whispered, her voice breaking. "My own husband is planning to—" She couldn't finish the sentence. Jack placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, his mind racing through their options. They needed more concrete evidence before they could go to the authorities, but waiting too long could be catastrophic. Sarah, who had been unusually quiet, suddenly spoke in Xavier's voice. 3 days, everything ready, no trace." The timeline was set. Whatever Xavier was planning, it was happening soon. They needed to act fast, but they also needed to be smart. One wrong move could tip him off and potentially accelerate his plans. They decided to set up a hidden camera in the playroom, carefully positioned to capture any suspicious activity. Fiona also began secretly recording all of Sarah's mimicked conversations, building an audio record of Xavier's incriminating statements. But their amateur surveillance efforts weren't without risk. Several times, Xavier nearly discovered the camera when he was playing with Diana. Each close call left them terrified that they'd given themselves away. The tension reached a breaking point when Xavier announced he was taking a day off work to spend time with Diana. "Just want to have a special daddy-daughter day," he said at breakfast, his smile not quite reaching his eyes. Fiona and Jack exchanged alarmed looks. Sarah, picking up on their anxiety, began pacing in her cage, repeating, "Danger, danger," softly, almost like a mantra. "That sounds wonderful," Fiona managed to say, her voice steady despite her fear. "I'll pack her favorite snacks." "No need," Xavier replied smoothly. "I'll take care of everything." Jack felt his heart rate accelerate. They couldn't let Diana be alone with Xavier, but they also couldn't show their hand. They needed a plan, and they needed it fast. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, Jack and Fiona met in the kitchen to discuss their options. Sarah watched from her cage, unusually alert for the late hour. "We could take Diana and run," Fiona suggested desperately. "Just disappear before he has a chance to—" "He'd find you," Jack pointed out. "And without proof, you'd look like a paranoid mother who kidnapped her child. We need evidence that will stand up in court." Sarah suddenly spoke siege once again in Xavier's voice. "No witnesses. Perfect accident. Insurance pays double for accidents at home." The pieces were falling into place. Xavier wasn't planning just any accident. He wanted it to happen at home, where the insurance payout would be highest. The realization made their blood run cold. As they talked through their options, none of them noticed the shadow that passed briefly across the kitchen window. None of them saw the figure that paused, listening, before silently moving away into the darkness. The next morning, Xavier was in an unusually good mood. He hugged Diana at breakfast, helped clean up the dishes, and even threw some friendly words Sarah's way. His sudden change in behavior only made them more nervous. What they didn't know was that their time was running out faster than they realized. Xavier had his own plans, and they were already in motion. The question was, would Sarah's warnings be enough to save Diana this time? As the day progressed, the tension in the house grew thicker. Every time Xavier came near Diana, Sarah would ruffle her feathers and make soft warning sounds. The parrot's behavior was becoming more agitated, as if she sensed something was about to happen. They needed to find solid evidence, and they needed to find it now. But as they would soon discover, Xavier wasn't the only one keeping secrets in the Richardson household, and the truth was far more complicated than any of them could have imagined. The morning started like any other in the Richardson household, but there was an undercurrent of tension that even Diana seemed to notice. The little girl was unusually clingy, refusing to leave Fiona's side as they went about their morning routine. Jack arrived early, finding Sarah in an agitated state. The parrot paced back and forth on her perch, occasionally muttering fragments of conversations in Xavier's voice. But today, there was something different about her behavior. She kept looking toward Xavier's office, her head tilting as if listening to something only she could hear. While preparing Diana's breakfast, Jack noticed Xavier making several hushed phone calls from his study. Each time he emerged, his expression was carefully neutral, but there was a gleam in his eyes that made Jack increasingly uneasy. "So we're running out of time," Fiona whispered to Jack when Xavier was out of earshot. "I found more documents in his office last night. He's updated all the insurance policies. Everything's set to pay out to him if anything happens to Diana or me." Before Jack could respond, Sarah's voice cut through the air, but this time, it wasn't Xavier's voice she was mimicking. Instead, she perfectly imitated Fiona's voice. "I can't take it anymore. Have to end this. And no other way." Both Jack and Fiona froze. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Fiona's face had gone pale. Those aren't my words," she stammered, but her voice lacked conviction. Jack studied her carefully. "Fiona, is there something you haven't told me?" Before she could answer, Xavier appeared in the doorway. "Told you about what?" he asked, his tone casual, but his eyes sharp. "Care about Diana's new preschool options," Jack covered smoothly. Fiona mentioned she was researching some alternatives. Xavier seemed to accept this explanation, but his gaze lingered on his wife for a moment too long. "Yes, well, we want only the best for our little angel, don't we?" He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Speaking of which, I've arranged a special family dinner tonight. Just the three of us." After Xavier left for work, Jack confronted Fiona in the kitchen. Sarah watched from her cage, unusually quiet. "What aren't you telling me?" he asked directly. Those words Sarah repeated. "They sounded like you were planning something too." Fiona sank into a kitchen chair, her shoulders slumping. "It's not what you think," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been gathering evidence, yes, but not just about Xavier's plans. I've been documenting everything because I discovered something else, something I wasn't sure how to tell anyone." She pulled out her phone and showed Jack a series of emails. They were from a private investigator she had hired months ago, long before the bathtub incident. "Xavier isn't who he claims to be," she explained. "His entire background is fabricated. The company he claims to work for, it's a shell corporation. His business trips, they're meetings with people I don't want to know about. I started investigating him when I noticed large sums of money moving through our accounts in strange ways." Jack felt his world tilting. "So when Sarah started warning us, I was already suspicious," Fiona finished. "The bathtub incident wasn't random. I think he's been planning something for a long time. The question is, why now? What's changed?" As if in answer, Sarah spoke again, this time in Xavier's voice. "Time running out. They're getting close. Have to move quickly." Jack's mind raced. "He knows," he realized. "He knows you're investigating him. That's why he's accelerating his plans." Fiona nodded slowly. "But there's more. Those documents you found on his computer, I planted them there. I needed to see how he would react, what he would do next. I've been playing a dangerous game, trying to gather enough evidence to protect Diana and myself before he realizes how much I know." The revelation shifted everything Jack thought he knew about the situation. He had assumed Fiona was an innocent victim, but she had been orchestrating her own investigation all along. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" he asked. "I couldn't risk it," she replied. "I didn't know who to trust." But then Sarah, she changed everything. "She showed me I could trust you." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of the front door opening. Xavier had returned unexpectedly, his footsteps echoing in the hallway. "Quick," Fiona whispered, sliding her phone back into her pocket. "Act natural." But when Xavier entered the kitchen, his expression told them he had heard enough. His carefully maintained facade had cracked, revealing something cold and calculating beneath. "Sawatl," he said, his voice eerily calm. "It seems we all have some explaining to do." Sarah's feathers ruffled, and she began making soft warning sounds. Diana, playing in her secure playpen nearby, looked up at the tension in the room. "I thought we could wait until dinner," Xavier continued, "but perhaps we should clear the air now. After all, we're all playing our parts so well, aren't we? The concerned wife, the devoted nanny, even the clever little bird. But did any of you stop to consider that you might not have the full picture?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out a folder. "You've been investigating me, dear wife. Well, I've been doing some investigating of my own, and what I've discovered is quite fascinating." He opened the folder and laid out several photographs on the kitchen table. They showed Fiona meeting with various people, including one face that made Jack's blood run cold. It was someone he recognized from his own past, someone he had hoped never to see again. "You see," Xavier said, his smile now predatory, "we're all keeping secrets, and some of them are bigger than others." The tension in the kitchen was palpable. Sarah had gone completely silent, her eyes darting between the three adults. Diana continued playing, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding around her. Jack and Fiona exchanged glances, both realizing that the game they thought they were playing had just become infinitely more complicated. The question now wasn't just about protecting Diana from Xavier, it was about uncovering the truth behind all their deceptions before it was too late. And somewhere in the middle of it all was Sarah, the unwitting witness who held pieces of everyone's secrets in her remarkable memory. The parrot watched the scene unfold, perhaps understanding more than any of them realized about the tangled web of lies and suspicions that had brought them to this moment. As Xavier closed the folder, his next words sent chills down their spines. "Now shall we discuss what really happened the day of the bathtub incident?" The kitchen had become a battlefield of secrets and accusations. Xavier stood at one end of the table, his hands resting on the spread photographs. Fiona remained seated, her face a mask of careful composure. Jack stood near Diana's playpen, positioned protectively between the child and her father. "The bathtub incident," Xavier continued, his voice unnaturally calm, "wasn't quite what it seemed, was it? Sarah may have raised the alarm, but the real question is, why was the bathtub full in the first place?" Fiona's hands trembled slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I told you I was called away for work." "No," Xavier cut her off. "You weren't. I checked your phone records. There was no call from the office that day. You left that bathtub full deliberately, didn't you?" Jack felt his chest tighten. He looked at Fiona, hoping to see denial in her eyes, but instead, he saw something else. Resignation. "I needed to know," she whispered. "I needed to see if I would really what?" Xavier's voice rose slightly. "Try to harm our daughter. Is that what you think of me?" Sarah suddenly spoke, her voice perfectly matching Fiona's. "Have to protect her. He's not who he says. The money isn't clean." Xavier laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Oh, the money, of course. It always comes back to the money, doesn't it? Did you tell Jack about your own investigation into my finances, about how deep you've dug?" "Stop," Jack interrupted. "Whatever's going on between you two, Diana shouldn't be in the middle of it." "Ah, Jack." Xavier turned his attention to the nanny. "The faithful protector, or should I say the perfect plant?" Fiona's head snapped up. "What?" Xavier pulled another photograph from his folder, sliding it across the table. It showed Jack meeting with someone in a dark suit, exchanging what appeared to be documents. "You didn't really think I'd hire just any nanny, did you?" Xavier smiled. Jack here has been working for me all along. Or at least, that's what I thought until recently. Jack felt the blood drain from his face. His past was catching up to him in ways he never expected. That's not, he began, but Xavier wasn't finished. You were supposed to watch Fiona, report her activities to me. Instead, you've been helping her. The question is, why? What made you switch sides? Sarah's voice cut through the tension, this time mimicking Jack. Can't let it happen again? Not another child. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Jack closed his eyes. Memories he'd tried to suppress flooding back. There was another family, wasn't there, Jack? Xavier pressed. Before us. Another child you were supposed to protect. That's enough. Jack's voice was hoarse. You don't know anything about that. I know everything, Xavier countered. I know about the accident, about how you blamed yourself. That's why I chose you. Your guilt made you perfect for the job. Fiona looked between them, realization dawning on her face. Jack, what is he talking about? Before Jack could respond, Sarah began speaking rapidly, switching between voices, piecing together fragments of conversations she'd overheard over months. Xavier discussing money transfers, Fiona making secret phone calls, Jack's late-night mumbled confessions to himself when he thought no one was listening. The bird was creating a verbal tapestry of their deceptions, revealing how their separate threads of secrecy had become inexplicably intertwined. You see, Xavier said, we're all playing parts in this little drama. Fiona, the suspicious wife investigating her husband's criminal connections, Jack, the haunted nanny seeking redemption, and me. He paused, his smile fading. The supposed villain of the piece. Then tell us the truth, Fiona demanded. If we're all being honest now, tell us what you're really planning. Xavier's expression changed, becoming almost sad. The truth? The truth is that everything I've done has been to protect Diana from them. He pulled out one final photograph. It showed a group of men in expensive suits, their faces serious and threatening. These are the people I really work for, the ones who own me, and by extension, this family. The shell corporations, Fiona breathed. Take the money laundering. I was recruited years ago, Xavier explained. It seemed perfect at first, the money, the power. But then Diana came along, and I realized I was trapped. They own everything, including her future. The insurance policies, Jack said slowly. They weren't for causing an accident. They were for escaping, Xavier finished. I've been building a way out for all of us. But he looked at Fiona. With your investigation, you've drawn their attention. They're watching us now. Sarah's agitation had been growing throughout the conversation. Suddenly, she let out a series of urgent calls. Car, black car, watching. They all moved to the window. Sure enough, a black sedan was parked across the street, its windows tinted, its engine running. They're here. Xavier's voice was tight with fear. We're out of time. What do they want? Fiona asked, clutching Diana close to her chest. Everything, Xavier replied. The money, the evidence you've gathered, and most importantly, silence. They can't risk exposure. Jack's protective instincts kicked in. We need to get Diana out of here now. It's not that simple, Xavier warned. Every exit will be watched. They've been waiting for us to show our hands. And now we have... Sarah's calls became more insistent. Danger, back door, danger. Through the kitchen window, they could see more dark vehicles approaching from both directions. The trap was closing in. There's something else you need to know, Xavier said urgently, reaching for his briefcase. The real reason I've been gathering evidence against them. It's not just about us anymore. But before he could explain further, the power in the house suddenly cut out, plunging them into an eerie silence broken only by Sarah's warning calls and Diana's confused whimpers. They were out of time, and the truth about Xavier's real motives and the true nature of the danger they faced was about to become horrifyingly clear. In the darkness of the kitchen, time seemed to stand still. Diana, sensing the tension, remained unusually quiet in Fiona's arms. Sarah's cage was a silhouette against the window, the parrot's movements casting shifting shadows on the wall. The basement, Xavier whispered urgently. There's a way out through the old coal chute. I've kept it clear just in case. Jack's mind raced back to his security checks of the house. He'd never noticed any such exit. Why didn't you mention this before? Because I hoped we'd never need it, Xavier replied, moving toward the basement door. The minute we use it, they'll know I've been preparing for this. Everything I've built, all the protection I've put in place. It ends the moment we go down those stairs. Fiona clutched Diana closer. What protection? You've been working with them. No, Xavier's voice was firm. I've been playing them, gathering evidence, building a case. Everything I've done, every penny I've moved, every document I've forged, it's all been to create a trail that leads straight to them. Sarah's voice cut through the darkness, mimicking Xavier from months ago. Keep them safe, whatever it takes. Evidence in the trust. The trust fund you set up for Diana, Fiona breathed. Jan, that's where you've hidden it all. Not just a trust fund, Xavier explained as he led them toward the basement. It's a dead man's switch. If anything happens to me or to any of us, everything goes public. Every transaction, every name, every crime they've committed. The basement stairs creaked under their feet as they descended. Jack kept to the rear, years of protective instinct kicking in. Above them, they could hear the sound of car doors slamming. They're here, Xavier's voice was tight. We don't have much time. In the basement, Xavier moved to what appeared to be a solid wall, pressing against a specific brick. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing a narrow passage. Wait, Jack said, the pieces finally falling into place. The other family, the one I couldn't save, they were involved in this too, weren't they? Xavier's silence was answer enough. That's why you chose me, Jack continued. I knew I'd do anything to prevent it from happening again. I chose you because you understood what was at stake, Xavier corrected, because you knew firsthand what these people are capable of. Footsteps sounded above them, heavy and purposeful. Sarah's warnings became more urgent, her calls echoing down the basement stairs. Take them, Xavier said to Jack, pressing a USB drive into his hand. Everything's on here, account numbers, names, dates. Get them somewhere safe. There's a car waiting 2 blocks east, key under the rear wheel well. You're not coming, Fiona's voice cracked. I can't. Xavier's face was grim. They'll know something's wrong if I disappear too. I need to stay. Keep them distracted. Make them think they still have control. They'll kill you, Fiona protested. No, they won't, Xavier smiled grimly. I'm too valuable. And as long as they don't know where you and Diana are, they can't risk eliminating me. I'm their only link to you. The footsteps above were getting closer to the basement door. Jack, Xavier turned to the nanny, promise me you'll protect them. Promise me you won't let what happened to the last family happen to mine. I promise. Jack's voice was firm. But you have to promise something too. Promise you'll find a way to end this, really end it. Xavier nodded. Everything they need is on that drive. Use it wisely, wait for my signal. Suddenly, Sarah's voice carried down from above, mimicking one of the men who had just entered. Check the basement, must be here somewhere. Go, Xavier urged them toward the passage. Now, Fiona hesitated for a moment, then pressed something into Xavier's hand, her phone. I have evidence too, she whispered. Use it if you need to. The passage was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for them to move through single file. Jack led the way, with Fiona carrying Diana behind him. The cold air smelled of earth and old stone. Behind them, they could hear Xavier closing the hidden door, followed by his footsteps moving away, up the stairs. Then came the sound of voices, muffled but tense. They moved as quietly as possible through the passage, Jack counting their steps, marking their progress. Diana, understanding the need for silence, kept her face buried in her mother's shoulder. After what seemed like an eternity, they reached the end of the tunnel. The old coal chute was exactly where Xavier had said it would be, concealed by careful landscaping. As they emerged into the night air, they could hear Sarah's voice carrying from the house. She was creating a diversion, screeching and making a commotion that would help cover any sounds of their escape. The car, Jack whispered, oriented himself. This way. They moved through backyards and side streets, avoiding the main roads where black sedans prowled. Diana remained remarkably quiet, as if sensing the gravity of their situation. When they reached the car, they found it exactly as Xavier had described. Inside was a bag containing cash, passports, and a note with detailed instructions. As they pulled away from the curb, Fiona looked back at their home, now surrounded by dark vehicles. In an upstairs window, Sarah's cage was visible, the parrot still raising a ruckus, still playing her part in their escape. "Will she be okay?" Fiona asked softly. "Will he be okay?" Jack kept his eyes on the road, careful to maintain a normal speed despite the urge to flee. Sarah's smarter than any of us realized, and Xavier, he's been planning this for a long time. We have to trust them both. In the back seat, Diana finally spoke, her small voice full of confusion. "Where are we going?" "Somewhere safe, sweetheart," Fiona assured her. "Just for a little while." But as they drove into the night, questions lingered. What was on the USB drive that was so important? What evidence had Fiona collected on her phone? And most importantly, what was Xavier's real plan? The answers would come, but for now, their priority was clear: keep Diana safe and wait for Xavier's signal. Whatever came next would depend on trust in Xavier's planning, in Jack's protective instincts, in Fiona's strength, and in a remarkable parrot who had proven to be more than just a pet. As the city lights faded behind them, Sarah's final warning call echoed in their memories. Be safe, be smart, be ready. Time passed slowly in their temporary sanctuary, a modest cabin far from the city. Diana had adapted to their new situation with remarkable resilience, finding joy in the simple pleasures of their hideaway, the birds that visited their feeder, the squirrels that scampered across their porch, the steady rhythm of country life. Fiona spent her days helping Diana with her lessons, trying to maintain some semblance of normalcy. Jack kept watch, his protective instincts never wavering. But always, their thoughts returned to Xavier and Sarah, wondering what was happening back at the house they'd left behind. The USB drive had revealed the true scope of Xavier's plan. For years, he had been meticulously documenting every transaction, every meeting, every illegal dealing of the organization. But more than that, he had been building a network of allies, other people trapped in similar situations, all waiting for the right moment to break free. They received updates through carefully arranged channels. Sarah had become something of a local celebrity after their departure. Xavier had crafted a story about the family taking an extended vacation, and the parrot's continued presence in the house helped maintain the illusion of normalcy. Her remarkable memory and ability to mimic voices had become an unexpected asset, helping Xavier maintain his cover. Then one morning, as autumn painted the trees in brilliant colors, they received the signal they'd been waiting for. It came in the form of a newspaper article about a major financial investigation. The organization was under scrutiny, its carefully constructed facade beginning to crumble. "It's starting," Jack said, showing Fiona the article. "Xavier's evidence is being put to use." Fiona read the article carefully, recognizing names and details she had uncovered in her own investigation. But is it enough? Will they be able to prove everything? Their answer came in the form of Sarah's voice, broadcast on the evening news during a segment about the investigation. The parrot had been recorded during a raid on the house, perfectly mimicking incriminating conversations between key members of the organization. Her recordings, combined with Xavier's documentation and Fiona's evidence, created an irrefutable trail of proof. The organization's downfall was swift and complete. One by one, its members were arrested, their criminal empire dismantled. Xavier's plan had worked perfectly. The evidence had been too overwhelming, too well documented to ignore. When it was finally safe to return home, they found Xavier waiting for them on the front porch, Sarah perched on his shoulder. The sight of them together, the man who had risked everything to protect his family and the bird who had helped make it possible, brought tears to their eyes. Diana ran to her father, all the fear and confusion of the past months forgotten in the joy of reunion. Xavier held her tightly, his eyes meeting Fiona's over their daughter's head. "I'm sorry," he said simply, "for everything, for not telling you sooner, for making you doubt me." Fiona joined them on the porch. "You did what you had to do, we all did." Jack watched the family reunion from a respectful distance, but Xavier called him over. "You kept your promise," he said. "You protected them when I couldn't." "We protected each other," Jack corrected. "All of us." Sarah fluttered down to her cage, which still sat in its place of honor by the window. She settled on her perch and looked at them all with her knowing eyes. "What happens now?" Fiona asked. "Now say," Xavier smiled, "we live, really live, without fear or secrets." The organization's assets were seized, and much of the money was returned to its rightful owners. Xavier's role in bringing them down was kept confidential, protecting them from any possible retaliation. The trust fund he had set up for Diana remained untouched, a legitimate legacy for their daughter's future. Jack stayed on as their nanny, his bond with the family too strong to break. His past guilt had finally been laid to rest, replaced by the knowledge that this time he had helped save not just a child, but an entire family. Fiona's investigative skills found a new purpose. She began working with a non-profit organization that helped other families escape similar situations. Her experience and understanding made her uniquely qualified to offer hope to those who thought themselves trapped. And Sarah? She remained their guardian angel, her remarkable abilities now focused on simpler things, making Diana laugh with her impressions, keeping watch over their now peaceful home, being part of the family she had helped save. One evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Sarah spoke in her own voice, not mimicking anyone. "Family safe now." They looked at each other in surprise. It was the first time she had ever spoken words that weren't copied from someone else. Somehow she had learned to express what she had known all along. Diana, sitting in Xavier's lap, reached up to touch Sarah's cage. "Yes," she said, with the simple wisdom of a child. "All safe now." The truth of those words settled over them like a warm blanket. They had faced darkness together and emerged stronger. Their story wasn't just about survival, it was about trust, courage, and the unexpected ways love could manifest itself. In the end, it hadn't been Xavier's careful planning, or Fiona's investigation, or Jack's protection that had saved them. It had been their willingness to trust each other, to fight for each other, that had made the difference. And it had all started with a parrot's warning screech, a sound that had set in motion events none of them could have predicted. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Sarah's voice carried one last time across the peaceful scene. Home. Love. Safe. 3 simple words that summed up everything they had fought for, everything they had achieved. Their family had been forged in crisis, tested by fire, and emerged unbreakable. Diana fell asleep in her father's arms, secure in the knowledge that she was protected and loved. Fiona leaned against Xavier's shoulder, their past doubts and fears replaced by a deeper understanding. Jack sat nearby, finally at peace with his role in their lives, and Sarah watched over them all, just as she always had, just as she always would. Her remarkable memory had helped save them, but it was her heart, her inexplicable but undeniable love for her family, that had truly made the difference. The night settled around them, calm and quiet. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new adventures, but they would face them together. Their story had taught them that sometimes the most extraordinary heroes could come in the most ordinary packages, and that love, in all its forms, was the strongest force of all. As they sat together under the stars, they knew that while their ordeal had ended, their story, their real story, was just beginning. And it would be a story worth telling, about a family that had found its strength in its darkest hour, guided by the unlikely wisdom of a remarkable parrot named Sarah. Thank you for joining me on this journey into the world of captivating stories. I trust you found today's narrative as engaging as I did. If you enjoyed this exploration into fascinating and compelling narratives, kindly indicate your appreciation by liking this video. Are you watching on mobile? Show your appreciation with a double tap for hype. For more captivating stories and journeys into the heart of compelling storytelling, please subscribe to the channel and activate notifications so you don't miss a single upload. Your thoughts and interpretations are most welcome. Please share your perspectives on today's story in the comments below. And if you believe others would find this content engaging, please consider sharing the video with your network. Until our next journey into the world of captivating tales, I bid you farewell.